Today what I'd like to talk about is a little bit about psychotherapy. I think I'll run the PowerPoint first, and then I'll see you in a minute. We're going to get into what is psychotherapy in just a moment, but I wanted to talk just for a little bit about where I think that it started. Now, we're not talking about consoling someone. That's more like sympathy rather than professional psychotherapy. But if I had to make a guess, and that's really all it is I would say it probably started with medicine and medical diagnosis. That is, a doctor comes in and starts asking you, what is your medical background? Have you ever been sick before? But then really does something completely different. Instead of asking a bunch of rote questions, then starts asking the person, when did you start to feel this way? What exactly is it that you feel? And to some extent, just having a professional ask you those things does actually make you feel a little better. Like, I'm going to get help, so you feel optimistic, which is important. If I was going to pick someone who I think is the first true professional, I would say it's probably Joseph Breuer, who worked with Freud. Freud is oftentimes stated as the person who thought up the quote-unquote talking cure, which was also called chimney sweeping. But in fact, it looks as though that Breuer was doing it first, or he was also one of the individual doctors who was treating people by simply talking to them to see what was going on. So now to the question of what is psychotherapy? It's just a way to make someone more functional. That is, something has happened, they don't feel well now, they are not able to do the things that they need to do. Perhaps it's very minor, like they just feel so anxious, they have difficulty at work, all the way to they feel so badly that they can't get up out of bed. That is a problem. Well, the complications, what's odd, I find, is that people will bring themselves to a therapist, but once they're there, they don't really try very hard to help you out. It's as if it's kind of a game. Now, I don't think they intend it to be that way, but they want help, but they're not going to just tell you. When you see in the movies where a therapist says, well, what's going on? And the person sits down and starts telling this long, drawn-out, highly detailed story about what their problem is, that really doesn't happen very often. And in many cases, a person just is so not self-aware that it's difficult for them at first to actually participate in therapy. And of course, the last one is people will not tell you the truth. They oftentimes will tell you mistruths, either because they're embarrassed or simply because they don't want to be there. They want this experience to be over as quickly and as painlessly as possible. Probably the biggest thing in how therapy works is you must be able to communicate on both parties, the therapist and the client. But there is no easy way to do this. Someone who's hoping to come to a therapist and get a magic pill, or have them say, well, if it hurts when you do that, then quit doing that. It's not that easy. So it really takes quite a bit of psychological energy. I mean, imagine trying to work with an addict, right, or an alcoholic. Someone has had this pattern of behavior for a very long period of time, and now your job is to tell them, quit doing that. But obviously, with an addict, it is not that easy. The last part is actually maybe one of the most important parts. You should not overtly give advice saying, well, this is what I think you should do. Because then you take away ownership of that particular thing from the individual. Say, for example, that there's I'm talking to someone and they're asking me where this certain place is, and I say, "Oh, it's up the street, and you turn left." And they go, "Oh, well, that's fine, but maybe that place after you turn left is 5 or 10 miles away." They didn't ask me, should I take my vehicle? Should I take a car? And they're likely to be very mad at me if they end up walking the whole way. So advice should be avoided if at all possible. Though guidance should be given, it should always be left up to the individual on what to do. There are three main types of psychotherapy that they do. I mean, there are actually a bunch, but the three we're going to talk about are Freudian analysis, just really quick, cognitive behavioral, which is actually one. They don't do cognitive, and then behavioral is a different one. It's CBT now. And then humanistic therapy as well. To start, let's talk about Freud. Freud thought a lot about the unconscious and what is your childhood experience. How does your relationship with your parents influence what you're doing today? But Freud thought that everything was unconscious. That means unknowable. If it's unknowable, how can you communicate that to others? What he needed to do then, because he felt you were filtering yourself all the time, was that you needed to be sort of unaware of what you were talking about, so that little things that were bothering you could bubble to the surface. So he had this thing he called free association. If you've ever seen something where they had a couch or a chaise lounge, which is like half a couch, what you're supposed to do is to lay on the couch and then look away from the therapist. That way you're not embarrassed. You can just let your mind wander and talk about whatever you want to talk about, whatever's on your mind. And the more comfortable you are, the more likely it is that those unconscious things will bubble to the surface. So you'll be talking about nothing, and then something important will come up. And then later on, you'll be talking about nothing, and something important will come up. How long does psychotherapy, Freudian analysis, I should say, take? Forever. It takes years. I had a professor who was a Freudian analyst, and she was talking about a client who was just finally breaking through some of her very serious issues. And I said, "Wow, that's so cool. How long did that take?" And she said, 6 or 7 years. Like, wait, 6 or 7 years? In my mind, if it's taking that long to fix someone, you're just doing it wrong. Now, I don't think, as a therapist, I was supposed to be able to fix someone, quote-unquote, using CBT, which is the next one, in about 10 hours. That means you only see them 10 times, and it might be quite a long time between sessions that you see someone. So someone's just ready to tell you what's going on, and then they have to leave, and maybe you don't see them for another week or so. Well, when they come back, they're not going to be at that point where they're so eager to talk. So 6 or 7 years is really way too long. On top of that, how do you know that you're right? Freud was pretty famous for being kind of egotistical, and if I said that this is what you are, well then that's what you are. If you disagree with me, you're just in denial. You're in denial of your neurosis or neurotic behavior. I think the biggest criticism of Freud simply is that you can't prove someone's neurosis is really what's bothering them, because you can't prove necessarily that it was really that unconscious process that started it. So, anyway, that's what I think about it. That's all I have to say about that. The cognitive behavioral technique is probably the most common, I would say. If you go to a therapist, they're using thinking and behavior as a model. For example, when my girlfriend and I were first dating, she would call me on the phone, or I would call her, but it was very common for her to say goodbye and hang up the phone at the same time. So I'm used to, okay, well, goodbye, we'll talk, next time, or blah, blah, blah. After bye, there's one little more thing, and then you can finally hang up. But for her, it was bye click. So I would think, does this mean she doesn't like me? Is there somebody else there that she's embarrassed that she's talking to me? I mean, what is the deal? So that's the cognitive part of it. If something is bothering you, what are you thinking? And so for this part, if you're afraid that someone doesn't like you, or that someone's mad at you for some reason, then you may start to have irrational thoughts. Oh, this person's leading me on. They really don't like me. Oh my gosh, they know that I really messed up that one time, and they're holding a grudge, when that may not even be close to the truth. So then you get to look at the behaviors. What could you do to actually disprove this idea that you have? If it is irrational, and even you might think that it's irrational, what can we do in order to fix that? One of the other things that behavioral therapy is good for is you do something and it makes you upset. So your behavior is actually, let me tell you another story. How about a different story? There was a woman that I went to college with who would have very large arguments with her husband. But her husband discovered that all he had to do was call her one of these very naughty names, and she would end the argument because she was so upset. So she would say, hey, I'm mad at you because of, and he would say, oh yeah, well, all right, you beep, right? And then she would be so out of her mind that she would walk away, and that would be the end of the argument. What happens there is she has taught him, the husband, how to end arguments. Now, I'm sure she didn't feel that way, right? But that's what happened. What we need then is for her to relabel this action. He calls her beep, and she goes off. She can't even control herself because she's so upset. But if she could see this word as his way of trying to get out of the argument, it might allow her to sort of short-circuit her anger and realize he's not really insulting me, he's trying to get out of actually answering my question. Humanism is the last one, and humanism is kind of, I would say, one of the more kind of complicated. In Freudian analysis, the person realizes the sessions are going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of work in order to get to a solution. In cognitive behavioral, they know that there's going to be some work involved, and they have to be as honest as possible. In Freudian and cognitive behavioral therapy, they know that the therapist is going to at least play a little bit of a part. They're going to be able to reflect, hey, I have this idea, what do you think about that? And the therapist should be able, without giving advice so much, should be able to qualitatively assess, yes, that would be good for you, or that might not be good. But let's, maybe to modify it. That would be good, but let's try this also and see how that goes. But it should come from the client first, the person who wanted help to begin with. But with humanistic therapy, you really get no help from the therapist. It's not that the person fixes or cures themselves, but the therapist in humanism is just a mirror. Well, I'm angry. Why are you angry? Well, I don't know, darn it, that's why I'm here. Well, tell me, what is it that brought you here today? Well, I had this fight with, this other person, and things just got out of control. Hey, I got really angry. What were you angry about? Well, I had a fight. What was the fight about? Well, this person said this, and this person said this, and then it just got out of control. Well, what would you have liked to have happened? Well, I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm here. I'm asking you. How come you don't know the answer? Right? That you're making the person come up with ideas. You're making the person try and figure it all out pretty much by themselves. You're not really supposed to help them all that much because it's about human growth. I can't help you to grow if I'm giving you all of the answers. Growth is difficult, it's time consuming, it's energy consuming, but you have to do all of it. So that one is not for the faint of heart. I think with many people, they're just very not self-aware, and I don't really think that they have sort of the wherewithal to kind of really engage with something like that. You'd have to have someone who is really self-aware. What do I mean? I did therapy with a woman who did not realize that she was upset until she was almost foaming at the mouth, hyperventilating. Her heart was racing. She had, felt faint and was literally almost foaming at the mouth with the aerated saliva. And then she kind of realized, oh dang, I'm really afraid. So if you have someone who's really not very self-aware, humanism is not really a good choice for them. But in humanism, I guess I want to say, oh man, let me start over. I learned